Well, people can continue to trickle in, but maybe we can just get started slowly. So, first and foremost, thank you so much for being here. We're really, really excited to be able to talk about our program, our oral history work with you. And to begin, so I'm Jen Noji. I'm Densho's Senior Development and Communications Manager, and I'll be serving as the program moderator. I also want to note that we are recording this program and we'll upload it to the event page later so that you can watch this again or share it with others. And to actually offer some opening remarks, I'm excited to introduce our executive director, Naomi Ostwald Kawamura.
Thanks, Jen. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Naomi Kawamura, the Executive Director of Densho. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much to the panelists. Oral history has always been really foundational and at the heart of Densho's work. Since our founding, we have recorded the stories of Japanese Americans who experienced the forced removal and incarceration firsthand. This history, the questions that this history raises about belonging, civil liberties, race, state power, and who is read as American or not, remains deeply relevant to today. Oral history helps us to connect this sort of larger history to individual lives and experiences, and it makes it more real and reminds us what is at stake when fear and prejudice are allowed to shape public policy. Existentially, we are now faced at this significant turning point, what we call the post-witness era. This generation that directly experienced the incarceration as adults have largely passed away, and those who were children during the war are also becoming fewer. So this does not mean that Densho's oral history program will end. It just means that the work will change. I believe that the wartime incarceration history continues to shape how people understand themselves and along with how we understand the United States itself. So the 25 new interviews that you'll hear about today are kind of part of that ongoing work in this new chapter for Densho's oral history program. So I thank you again for being here, and it is now my pleasure to hand this over to Jen. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Yeah, and thanks all again. So before we dive in, I just wanted to say a little bit more about today's program. So, here's what we have in store. We're going to just start by offering some insight into Densho's oral history program overall, exploring how it has grown over the past 3 decades, and then we'll also share some updates about our recent oral history interviews and recent projects. And at the end of the program, we will have an open Q&A session. So please do take note of any questions that you have as our speakers are talking, or just in response to what we're saying. And you can submit those questions through the Q&A tool that is built into this Zoom webinar. So that button, the Q&A button, should be at the bottom of your screen. And if you don't immediately see it, there's a button that says More. So try pressing that More button, and then you should be able to find the Q&A. But otherwise, we do have some wonderful behind the scenes tech folks who could offer some more directions in the chat if needed. But so that aside, we're also really excited to welcome Virginia Yamada, Densho's Oral History Program Manager, and some special guest speakers, including Michael Omi, Glen, Kitayama, and Evan Kodani, who I'll introduce in more detail very soon. And just to build off of what Naomi was sharing about the post-witness era, and really just to offer a little bit more context for this discussion, I think that, in discussing the evolution of Densho's oral history work, it's really, really important to also address how our Japanese American community has changed so much, since the war, of course, but also since Densho was founded in 1996. And so, as the title of this program suggests, we will really be diving into what is referred to as the post-witness era, which, as Naomi said, is marked by the aging and passing of those eyewitnesses, especially those adults who were incarcerated during the war. So what that means is that, many of the people who lived through the wartime incarceration are no longer with us, at least not, Issei and many of the Nisei who were older during that period and who would have had the most clear memories of that experience. But, also as Naomi mentioned, there are still many, many interviews and perspectives that Densho wants to capture because they have so much to offer. And of course, there are also still former incarcerees with us who are, really active and very much willing and able to share their stories with Densho. And so we are doing everything in our power to capture those perspectives and to capture those stories. Um, in fact, I should mention that in this last project that we'll be talking about today, actually one-third of the people that we interviewed were in fact former incarcerees, so people who had been incarcerated in 6 different camps. And then at the same time, as we do continue to interview those camp survivors, we're also interviewing descendants, so children of those former incarcerees, many of whom are Sansei, who were born after the war. And, we really, really think that those perspectives have so much to offer us as well, not only because they can shed light on some of the intergenerational effects of the incarceration, but also because they can, tell us more about their parents and some of those older generations who might not have had the chance to talk about their experiences themselves, or who maybe didn't want to talk about those experiences. And so, Densho is deeply committed to conducting oral histories with those descendants, with those Sansei, in addition to former incarcerees who are still with us. And, as we're doing this work, I think our methods and some of the topics that we're collecting are shifting a little bit. But actually, our first speaker, Virginia Yamada, will talk about that in more detail. And so, transitioning into Virginia's talk, it's my pleasure to introduce Densho's Oral History Program Manager, Virginia, who oversees and coordinates our full life history interviews. Virginia works with regional interview teams and manages community oral history partnerships. And she has worked with Densho for over 20 years. And she began after witnessing the care and thoroughness that went into Densho's interview, actually with her own mother-in-law. So we're super, super lucky to have Virginia at Densho, and we're also lucky to have her here today. So with that, I'll turn things over to Virginia.
Hi, Jen, thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to try to squeeze in a brief overview of Densho's oral history program and also talk about what lies ahead. So back in 1996, volunteers from Seattle, the Seattle Japanese American community, started an oral history project to collect, preserve, and share personal stories centered around Japanese American incarceration history. These were firsthand experiences of mostly Nisei who lived through World War II. For many, it was the first time they'd spoken of this experience, and this initial storytelling was often emotional and healing and also eye-opening for other family members. It was originally thought that this would be a 3 to 5 year project. 30 years later, we're still here conducting oral histories. After that initial push to conduct as many interviews with community members and elders as we could, we began to document stories of the immediate post-war years to better understand what happened to families after they were released from detention facilities. It's during this time that we began to interview older Sansei. So if you look at this next slide, you will see a couple of charts. And right now, we have over 1,200 published oral histories. And if you look at that pie chart, you can see that the majority of our interviews, not surprisingly, are with Nisei. We also have a small percentage of interviews with narrators who identified as Issei, Kibei, and Yonsei, as well as people who straddle the Nisei-Sansei generations. And you can see that after Nisei, the next largest narrator group are people who identify as Sansei. So as many of our Nisei narrators were in their 70s, 80s, and 90s when they were interviewed, the same is now true of many of our Sansei narrators. As we now turn our focus to this generation, this number will continue to grow. If you look at the narrators by camp, you can see that we have an imbalance of camp representation, and that's the main reason Minidoka is so highly represented is because this project started in Seattle, but we're continuing to seek out stories from the lesser represented camps. So this next slide shows the result of our recent project. It's a project that was supported by a California Civil Liberties Public Education grant and also a Japanese American Confinement Sites grant. And this project made it possible to conduct 25 new oral histories that focused on Japanese Americans who survived World War II or who made life choices that were inspired by their family's wartime confinement. On the next slide, we listed a few of the topics that were covered during some of these oral histories. And now that we've collected all of these oral histories, these new ones, we'll continue to digitize and transcribe them and get them ready for publication. And as we work through and complete this process, we expect to gain more insight into all of the themes that were covered. And we hope to increase our understanding of the intergenerational impacts of the wartime incarceration. So what's next? Densho has always been guided by this through line to pass on to the next generation. As generations change and Densho expands and tries new approaches to address the needs that come with documenting history and community memory, we now find ourselves transitioning into this newest phase of focusing on the aftermath of the incarceration as we seek to gain insight into the long-term effects on descendants of this history and its effects on identity. So this brings us to the future and the LA team. Our oral history program is moving forward. Not only have we been working with the next generation of narrators, we have also been working with the next generation of interviewers and documentarians. Expansion of our interview team beyond Densho staff makes us more nimble, and it's a good model for working with regional community members to capture lesser represented stories in a broader geographical area. I'm really excited about the work the LA team has been doing, and I'm looking forward to their discussion and hearing them share their experiences and insights. I do want to take a moment here to acknowledge Jennifer Noji, who, in addition to moderating this program today, and in addition to her other Densho roles, Jen also serves as a Densho interviewer, and she's an integral part of our LA-based interview team. She joined us on a recent oral history trip to the Bay Area, where she interviewed Michael Omi, who you will be meeting shortly. Before we meet Michael and the LA team, here's a short 1-minute clip from an interview that our Bay Area team recently helped us record. Wendy Takuda was born and raised in Seattle, Washington, which is where she began her television career. She then went on to become a broadcast journalist in the Bay Area and Los Angeles. Here she reflects on the experience and aftermath of Japanese American incarceration, the importance to preserve that history, and the responsibility to defend civil liberties and speak out against discrimination.
And I would say, I am the child of prisoners. And that's another thing I want Japanese Americans to remember forever. And one of the reasons I want them to remember it forever is because I want them to make a difference in this country. They have a debt to their great-grandparents. And that debt will never end. And that is a debt to America, to not forget these things that have happened to us. They happened to us and they happened in America. Freedom is that fragile, you know? It's that fragile. And we are in a unique position to tell that story or to lead, you know, a charge to say, this is not right. It's not right to do that thing, that kind of thing. It's not right to imprison people because of their race. It's our duty, I think, to carry that legacy. I mean,
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Virginia, for those remarks, that overview of Densho's program, but for also, showing us that oral history clip which, we hope offers you a little bit of insight into the kinds of reflections that we were able to capture during, this project, but also during our recent oral history trip to the Bay Area. And actually, that offers a perfect transition into welcoming our next speaker, Michael Omi, who I was so, so lucky to be able to interview on that same trip. But just to say a little bit more about Michael. So Michael Omi is Professor Emeritus of Ethnic Studies at UC Berkeley. He is the co-author of Racial Formation in the United States and co-editor of Japanese American Millennials, Rethinking Generation, Community, and Diversity. Michael was also the inaugural chair of the Asian American Research Center and a recipient of UC Berkeley's prestigious Distinguished Teaching Award. And, I should just say briefly that interviewing Michael was kind of like meeting a celebrity. Truly, it was such an honor and a privilege to be able to speak with Michael and just to meet this person whose work I'd been reading for years, and whose work I'd even taught in some of my past classes. So it was really, really exciting to have those conversations with Michael, and we're so, so lucky to have him here today. And I think it's a great opportunity to hear a little bit from one of our own oral history narrators, as well as a scholar who could tell us a little bit more about the importance of these oral histories for scholarly work and for education. So thank you, Michael.
No, thank you, Jen. Thanks for that generous introduction. Um, I first wanted to confess that when I first received a gracious invitation from Virginia to participate as one of Densho's interviewees, I thought it was a mistake. My impression was that, the oral histories focused on those who directly experienced their removal and incarceration during World War II, and including even if they were young children at the time. So I replied to Virginia, I said, "Hey, I'm old, but I was born after the camps." Um, in addition, let me say that I didn't consider myself a likely candidate for other reasons as well. My parents were both born and raised in Northern California, but they were not incarcerated during the war. My father volunteered for the Army right before Pearl Harbor, and my mother and her older sister were staying with their grandparents in Japan when the war broke out. They tried to return to the United States, but could not until well after the end of the war. Now, that being said about my parents, my extended family on both sides were incarcerated. This included my grandparents as well as my dad's siblings, who were in fact renunciants and moved from Topaz, Utah to Tule Lake. Now, for these life histories, Jen served as my interviewer, excuse me. And to my surprise, we talked for like over 3 hours. I couldn't believe that lasted so long because I thought I'd be done in like an hour. But Densho really wants its interviewees, its narrators, to describe the entire life arc of their lives, to talk about their families, and to really deeply reflect on their life experiences. Now, what was interesting for me serving as this interviewee, this narrator, is that I came to realize that one's memory is a pretty select and slippery and tricky thing. There were times where I wondered if I was misinterpreting my past from the standpoint of the present. And there were a lot of lapses in my memory as well. And when Jen questioned me, there were times, many times, where I realized there were many things that I simply didn't know about my family. But I take it that these gaps in knowledge are really shared by others in my generation. Most Sansei always say, quote, "I never heard about the camps. I never learned about them. My parents and grandparents never talked about it." And that is, in fact, a very common experience and one in which it's been difficult to fill these gaps in family history, in family knowledge. Now, in many respects, this is what makes these oral histories so critically important. And Densho oral histories are just an amazing resource for multiple audiences. Those who went through the incarceration experience, their descendants, artists, filmmakers, students, scholars, and even those who are simply interested in history and understanding the human condition. Now, I could say this as an academic, and not so much as a scholar. I consider Glenn and Evan to be scholars as well. Many folks have provided us with these kind of historical or sociological or anthropological accounts of the incarceration of Japanese Americans. But these oral histories really do offer a kind of unique lens to understand the enduring trauma of the camp experience. One that helps us understand, I think, not only the past, but the present moment as well. I've always been taken by this quote by author Gore Vidal, who once said, "We are the United States of amnesia. We learn nothing because we remember nothing." And we simply do need to remember. And the unique and diverse voices and experience in this vast Densho oral history archive really helps us to remember. And such remembrances are becoming particularly important in these perilous times where American history itself is being erased or sanitized to serve authoritarian political ends. In many ways, we must come to understand how the injustices of the past continue to haunt the present. And these oral histories help remind us of that. Um, so let me end there, and we could perhaps take up some other topics in conversation along with Glenn and Evan a bit later in the program. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michael. Um, Gosh, I have so many questions and thoughts, but like you said, let's return to them a little bit later once we hear from Glenn and Evan. And please do submit any questions you might have in the Q&A function for the Zoom webinar. But yes, I am really, really excited to welcome our second guest speaker, Glen Kitayama, who is a retired school teacher and is the vice chair of the Manzanar Committee. His master's thesis on the redress movement was the foundation of the book, NCRR, The Grassroots Struggle for Japanese American Redress and Reparations. Glenn also served as and serves as one of Densho's oral history interviewers. And I'm excited to share that he's already conducted 13 oral histories for Densho, and he continues to do more, I must say, at a really impressively fast rate. So thank you so much, Glenn. And we're, yes, very, very excited to hear from you today and to learn more about some of your experiences, as an interviewer for Densho.
Okay. One thing that I get asked quite often is, like why do you do this? And part of my inspiration I wanted to show you. These are my grandparents, my paternal grandparents, Eizaburo Kitayama and Kimiko Kitayama. They were both incarcerated at Manzanar, along with my father and my uncle and aunt. And my mother's side they were incarcerated at Amachi. But to talk a little bit about my grandfather, he means a lot to me because he's the one who first introduced me to the camps, or really talked about the camps. One time when I was a kid, we were coming down on vacation, and we're going down the 395, and my father just points out, that's where I went to camp when I was a kid, and he's pointing out Manzanar. I didn't know it at the time. And my first reaction was, I always wanted to go to camp as a kid. Why don't you ever send me? And that kind of shows you how little I knew when I was 12 years old. And it wasn't until a few years later that my grandfather told me about what Manzanar was. He didn't really talk so much about what happened in the camps, but the main thing that he talked about was what he lost. No, they weren't rich. Uh, they rented a house. And he said, yeah, everything that we had to sell or we had to get rid of. Talked about the Emerson radio that he lost, and we're not talking about these little transistors. We're talking about these big console radios from the 1930s and 1940s, and the brand new curtains and everything. And I could see the real hurt in his eyes that this was not a very pleasant experience for him. Later on, my dad opened up and he said, "Yeah, actually, my grandfather got so mad that he ended up just kicking everyone out of the so-called evacuation sale and gave all the yeah, gave everything that we had to the Mexican American family across the street in Boyle Heights because he said, in his own words, at least they said thank you." But anyway, it was from that experience that later on in my early 20s, I joined the redress movement. And I didn't really think much about it at the time, but as I got to talking with folks, I felt a real connection with them because the folks who were involved in redress, they were involved with the Asian American movement way about 15 years earlier. And I thought, wow, these guys, these folks, they feel the same way about things that I do. And I was so happy to have found them. And I never knew that this would be my life's journey. I was a business major when I was in college, and I thought that was going to be what I was going to do. And I kind of threw all that out the window, and I thought, this is what I need to do. And I've been doing it pretty much ever since in one way or another. Um, the funny thing is that, working with Densho right now, I it's all of this experience in working with the folks in the community has really helped a lot because I know them so well. And so I've been saying that a lot of the some of the interviews that I've been doing, it's like I run into someone at a meeting and think, ah, I got to talk to this person. And then I'd write their name down and then I'd send it over to Virginia and then we'd all talk about it. Well, do you think this person would be good? And generally, it's all turned out to be okay. I was asked one time, I guess I was asked earlier, what are what's the difference between the interviews that I had done earlier, um, and the ones that I'm doing right now? And the funny thing is that I had no idea that back in 1997, there was a redress conference at UCLA. And I was asked by Professor Don Nakanishi at the Asian American Studies Center to conduct interviews with folks who were in the redress movement because he already knew that my research was on redress. And so I interviewed, among other people, Sue Embry. And I never knew what happened to these interviews afterwards. And so a few years ago, I found out that Bruce Embry, Sue Embry's son, has been using that interview that I did with with his mom um, to help for some trainings that we've been doing with some young students that are in from different Nikkei student unions across California. And I asked Bruce, "Well, where did you find this?" And he didn't know. And I didn't know either, but I recognized the interview and I thought, this is the one that I did with Sue Embry back in 1997. I had no idea what happened to it. And I was really pleased to learn just a couple of weeks ago through Densho that Densho actually has all of these interviews. And it's been used for quite a long time. And and I was just so happy that that they've been able to be used in this way, to be able to, be to be able to share Sue's story with a lot of other folks who are maybe like college age right now. Um, any other questions, Jen? I don't know what else I could ask, or is my time up right now?
Thanks, Glenn. Um, I mean, I have tons of questions, but maybe we can, let's see, maybe we can hear from Evan and then we can open it up to a discussion with all of you. How does that sound?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Glenn, for sharing more about, some of your original motivations, but also, that early work that you did do for Densho in 1997 without even realizing it. So, we really recommend and encourage everyone to see some of those earlier interviews that Glenn mentioned, and we can share that with all of you later as well. But yeah, I'm now excited to introduce our next, third special guest speaker, Evan Kodani, who has also been working with Densho to actually record oral history interviewers. So Evan has been serving as a videographer for the Densho Oral History program for years. But just to say a little bit more about Evan, so Evan Kodani is a Yonsei documentary filmmaker and the manager of the Japanese American National Museum's Watase Media Arts Center. His past film projects include the Emmy-winning Masters of Modern Design, Nobuko Miyamoto, A Song in Movement, One Fighting Irishman, and most recently, Misadventures of a Nisei Weak Queen. And today, we'll hear from Evan more about his experiences having conducted so many oral histories. In fact, for Densho, we're excited to share that Evan has already recorded 25 oral histories, and he continues to record more. So thank you so much, Evan, for being here. We're excited to hear about your experiences.
Thanks, Jen. Um, yeah, I was just thinking back, and I think the first oral history I probably ever did or recorded video was with my grandmother while I was still in college. I was taking a class called Ethno-Communications at UCLA, which at the time was taught by Bob Nakamura, who was also the one who founded the Media Arts Center at JANM. And that was just a short one, not like a long 3 hour one like Michael had to do, but like a 30-minute one. But then after I came and interned at the museum at one point and then started working here, I borrowed a camera and went back up. I'm from the Bay Area originally and went back up there, and I interviewed my grandfather and then my grandma again later, and those were both longer. And those both ended up being, only a year or two before each of them had passed away. So, it was extra meaningful for me that I was able to do that. Um, you know, I guess, filming all these oral histories with Densho, I have a both kind of the oral history perspective, but also the perspective as a filmmaker. At the museum, a lot of the interviews we film are with the intention of using them in documentary projects. So it's always nice to do interviews with Densho where, they can be quite expansive and talk about the whole life story, and you're not necessarily focused on, just a specific story that you're trying to get down for a film or something like that. Um, and the other thing I was thinking about was with previous, you kind of also never know how you're going to want, how some of these will be used in the future. One of the first oral histories I did with Jana back in the day was with someone called Sumi Kozawa, who had a floral shop it was actually in the neighborhood I was living in at the time, and I didn't even know. And, years later, she had passed away, and then I got to know her daughter, Sumi, who lives in the Seattle area. And my coworker at the time, Yuka, and I made a project that was kind of going through the house estate sale before it happened. And so we were able to go back to that interview and use that as a reference. And so and for ones that are on Densho, we've used those as, background, all the transcripts and everything, use those for film projects, for research, and also using clips of those, since Densho, so generously shares those for use for all sorts of people. So that's been really valuable as well. I think specifically for the LA interviews we've done recently, I've gotten to work with Jen and Glenn and Susie, and for me, it's been really interesting because a lot of the people are people in the community that I've known for many years, or at least seen in passing or at events all over Little Tokyo, and yeah, it's always like, oh, you kind of assume like, oh, someone must have interviewed them at some point, but then you come to realize, oh no, this is actually, the first time some of these people are getting recorded. So it's making me also think about, oh, now I need to start interviewing, other people of my parents' generation, and probably my parents and aunts and uncles too, themselves. So um, yeah, that's something I've been thinking about also. Okay, I mean, we can go into the Q&A unless there's other questions you had, Jen.
Yeah, thanks so much, Evan. Yeah, maybe before opening things up to our audience members, I actually just had a couple of questions that I wanted to ask all three of you, and Virginia, please feel free to jump in here as well. But given all of your interesting, unique, and slightly different experiences in relation to Densho's oral history work. I know that you've all seen and experienced various different things, either for Michael, during your own interview, but for Evan and Glenn and in Virginia during interviews that you've conducted or helped record. And so we were just wondering if you could share any interesting, surprising, or particularly meaningful experiences that you had either in your own oral history interview or in past recent oral history interviews that you've done. And anyone could
Well,
jump in.
oh, well, not sort of speaking directly to that question, Jen, but I was sort of interested in this whole turn which Dento is making towards a what it terms a post witness era in some ways. And I kind of think that's important because certainly what Densho has given us with these, what, 1,200 interviews or something, is really a kind of archive that shows how, the removal and incarceration experience, how it really indelibly shaped and not only lives of those who it directly affected, but subsequent generations as well. And it also speaks to this question to me that I've been sort of interested in as Japanese America itself has evolved is what exactly is Japanese American ethnic identity? And how has it transformed over time? And how do specific individuals really experience that now? And I think that's wrapped up in this question of the sort of post-witness era. I could speak to, my son who's Yonsei. His sort of Japanese American ethnic identity is very different than mine. And it's important to sort of chart, narrate those transformations as well, and how subsequent generations or how new communities, such as those people who come as Shin Nisei. I've had students whose parents came here in the 90s or in the 2000s, and they were born here, and their experiences are very distinct and different as well. So I think it offers an opening up, an opportunity to really show how diverse the Japanese American experience has become.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Michael. Um, and before I say anything else, Evan or Glenn, do you want to either add on or share anything else that comes to mind?
Um, shall say something about I guess the post-witness era? I think that's where Michael was going, and that's kind of a common link, I think, with all of the interviews that Evan and I have done, because they're all Sansei, pretty much the Sansei generation, and the folks that I interviewed, they may not have used the term generational trauma, but I think I will, because all of their motivations for doing what they did with in the Asian American movement, in the redress movement, and even in their current activism today was really rooted with the camps and what they learned about it. Because in the Asian American movement, they're all just trying to discover what happened to our families and asking a lot of questions. And that's how the Manzanar pilgrimages and other pilgrimages start to develop. Um, so I thought that was a common thread throughout most of the interviews. And then if in talking with a lot of them, they felt that there was a lot of allyship with the Muslim American community with what they went through after 9/11 and with the movement for Black reparations right now. And over at Manzanar in particular, uh, we have a very close relationship with the Paiute Shoshone tribe up around Lone Pine Independence area where Manzanar was. And so we've been working with them for quite a bit. So I think that these stories are really important to share, and it's important to be able to relate it for what happened to us with what's happened right now. And one of the funny things that came up was in a recent interview that Evan and I did. We were talking with James Okazaki, and I wasn't sure where this was really going to go because he had mentioned that his son is a retired employee from Homeland Security. And then later on in the interview, he starts talking about this again. And he said that his son was actually recruited again to come out of retirement. I believe this is the correct story, uh, from Homeland Security and ICE. And they were going to pay him a tremendous bonus, I think a six-figure bonus to be able to join. And so James asked him, "Well, what are you going to do?" And he says, "Oh, I'm not going to join this. What am I? I'm going to take this blood money so that I could go bash immigrants' heads? No, I can't do that." And James, I thought he was going to start tearing up, where he said, "I've never been prouder of my son in that moment."
Yeah.
Yeah, I think well, just going on the question of the post-witness era, that's something we wrestle with at the museum too, especially with our volunteer docents, right? And no longer having those first-person stories that they can share in the galleries with people. Um, I think for me, doing these interviews, as we've been working on at the museum, redoing our whole core exhibit and everything. One of the galleries is about the whole Asian American movement era, and the first Manzanar pilgrimage and Gidra magazine, and so being able to do these interviews with people, and they're the people literally coming from the pages of these magazines. It just gives so much more valuable context to something that could just be an artifact or a photo, right? Is now, because of these interviews, it's you have the whole stories behind these people. It makes them much more real and important. And then the other thing I was thinking of was, thinking about the Shin Nisei and the new Japanese immigrants that have come here. Like they're people that also have been really important in shaping communities like Little Tokyo, right? Like so many of the legacy businesses and stuff that we have down here were started. Some of the old restaurants, right, were started by people who immigrated here in the 50s and things like that. And all these artists and other people who have come over. So I think, yeah, it's really important that we keep documenting these stories as well, because it's a part of this whole Japanese American experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you all. I am just keeping an eye on time, and I know there's, actually some questions from the audience as well. But just before turning to the open Q&A, I wondered if there was anything else that any of you wanted to share, either in response to each other or anything else about things that you've noticed in the recent oral histories you've done, or just about the value or importance of these oral histories, in this moment, both this current moment, but also thinking about the post-witness era, but, or the value of these oral histories regardless, right? So, um, any other thoughts right now? Great. Okay.
Well,
Well, then,
oh,
oh,
I'm sorry.
please,
So
Michael.
just really briefly, it just seems to me that, you're saying thinking about um, how these histories relate to sort of the current moment. Um, it was Mark Twain who once said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Actually, I think Mark Twain borrowed that off of someone else. But what it speaks to is that events never happen in the same way. But in studying this history, in looking at this incredible archive, it really does give us insights into our present political situation, and in fact, and what the future may hold. So I think that's its political importance in the current period cannot be understated.
Yes, thank you, Michael. And actually, kind of offering similar sentiments, we did want to just show one more short oral history clip, and then I promise we'll get to audience questions. But just, I think another oral history that we recently did that really moved us, like so many of the other interviews that we've done. But this oral history is from Stan Umeda. And he was incarcerated along with his family when he was 6 years old. First, they went to Fresno Assembly Center, and then they were incarcerated in Jerome, and then after Jerome in Gila River. And then after the war, he did return to Sacramento, where he finished high school, and he actually went on to become a social worker. And just another quick note about Stan, now at the age of 91, he and his wife, Christina Mehta, continue to give presentations to teachers and students about their experiences. And so I think just sort of capturing some of what we're saying, we just wanted to share this short oral history clip with you.
Well, it is in one sense sad to see history repeating itself. In one sense, that we have gone through this before. It's not like it's unknown, and yet at the same time, due to political power and all these other kinds of things, that we do the same thing over and over again, never seemingly to learn what we have done in the past. But I think what history tells us is that you really have to study and understand history so that you try not to make the same mistakes over and over again, which seems to be the case. But in any event, you got to hang in there and tell the stories over and over again because it is important for your continuation, because there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Things happen at times when it looks real dark, but eventually there comes a light.
Yeah. So I think Stan, sort of offers us a hopeful note, but still speaks to, what you all have been sharing. So thanks. We just wanted to share that one segment as well from our recent interviews. But yeah, very quickly before now diving into the Q&A, we did just want to, take a moment to thank some various people. First and foremost, thank you so much again to our speakers, Virginia, Michael, Evan, and Glenn, for being here and sharing your experiences, your reflections, and your insights with us. And also, thanks to some Densho staff members like Dana Hoshide and Courtney Y, who have been helping behind the scenes to really make this program happen. And I did want to acknowledge that this project was supported by the California Civil Liberties Public Education Program, the Japanese American Confinement Sites Grant Program, and by For Culture and the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture. So we're grateful for their support. And lastly, I wanted to thank all of you for taking time during your busy days to be here with us. We really, really appreciate you being here. And, it's really because of you that we do this work, and we feel inspired to make sure that these stories are never forgotten. But with that, I will jump into the Q&A. So thank you all for sharing questions. Please do keep asking questions, and if you could, please use that Q&A tool. It'll just be a little bit easier for us to make sure that we see the questions coming in. Um, but first, I think we can just answer some of those first earlier questions that um, some folks had asked. So, quickly to address, someone asked, when you interview Japanese Americans who are not incarcerees, are you seeking their life stories, or are you seeking to tell about the former incarcerees' parents' lives? And I think, the answer there is that we really are seeking the descendants' stories. We find there's so much value to be gained in knowing what happened after the war, whether that includes resettlement and just the post-war era, maybe even highlighting stories from the redress movement and afterward. So that hopefully answers that question. And let's see. Um, Aside from oral histories, how are Densho and other orgs going about acquiring ephemera and non-governmental documentation that are being discarded as descendants clear out their ancestors' homes? Another really great question. Um, I'll speak to Densho. So Densho does, digitize these materials as well. In fact, I really encourage you all to explore the Densho digital repository, which are, our Densho's archives, where we have thousands and thousands of these personal documents, diaries, letters, photos, etc. And you can look for documents related to particular people or particular camps. But we just encourage you to explore that resource. And I do want to note, Densho did just launch a public index project, a public index of Japanese American collections, which seeks to identify and map materials that are scattered across the country and beyond, both in institutions, but also, we're interested in family collections as well. So anyone is welcome to submit any collections for nomination to be included in that index. So we can share information about the Densho Digital Repository as well as that public index project with you. And let's see. So another question, are you seeking, are you seeking interviews about post-redress era time periods, specifically the time period leading up to and following the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center? Because this period is also a significant period for Japanese Americans. And absolutely, I mean, I think what is really wonderful about the Densho oral histories is that they do use this life history approach. And that means, as Michael shared with us earlier, we really do want to hear about our oral history narrators' full lives, including, their experiences around the 9/11 attacks, but also afterwards and even today. So, when we say life history, we really do mean from before the narrators were even born until now, and maybe even their goals and visions for the future. Okay, and I'm sorry if I'm missing any, but let's see. Uh, and if my panelists see any questions, please feel free to jump in as well. Have you thought about doing... okay, and another question, have you thought about doing interviews with Japanese Americans whose families have been dispersed to other non-California communities? And I actually wondered if, Virginia, you would want to jump in about some of the other oral histories that we've been doing with folks beyond California or even beyond the West Coast.
Um, yeah, sure. So, thanks, Jen. So, yeah, we are this particular project that we're kind of focusing on today was specifically because it was a California Civil Liberties Education Program project. It was specifically focused on California, but we are actively seeking out oral histories throughout the entire United States. And we currently have another grant working with 4 partners in different regions, and it's to sort of collect their um, community story, and it will involve a combination of collecting, photos and documents, as well as perhaps creating maybe an encyclopedia article about the community. And added to that will be up to 5 oral histories with people who can speak to that community's history. So that is one project that we're really excited about, and we're kind of hoping to, after working with these 4 communities, to kind of expand that even further. That particular project was based on um, an older project that we worked with the Alameda community, and where they have like a huge collection now. They're a partner in our digital repository, and they have a huge collection of so many photos and documents, and I think it's up to 12 oral histories. And so that is a model that we would like to continue pursuing and expanding. And that's why I was talking earlier about the importance of sort of creating these regional teams of oral historians. What's really nice is to maybe have 2 interviewers and one a videographer. Um, that's a really strong team actually to kind of go out and collect oral histories. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, thanks so much, Virginia. Um, let's see. I'm sorry, I know that we only have 2 minutes left, so I want to just encourage you, if we don't get to your question, please do email us at info@densho.org, as it says on the screen. But just another question, in our interviews, do you encounter stories about the train ride from assembly centers to the camps, so to the incarceration camps? And we certainly do. I don't know if Virginia or Evan and Glenn, if you have any particular examples or specific examples of narrators who have highlighted that experience, like on those train rides. I'm not sure if anyone wants to jump in there. Yeah. Okay, well, what I would say is, I mean, I think a really, really great aspect of Densho's oral histories is that, as mentioned, there are transcripts, but those oral histories are also segmented. And so you can look at all of these individual segments of oral histories that would allow you to see specific topics or essentially summaries of what's mentioned in that segment. And so that would let you more easily find a segment that says, oral history narrator describes the train ride. So I encourage you to do that. Um, let's see. I'm sorry that we're really running out of time, but I wanted to maybe try to answer a couple more if you can stay on. So do you have stories of LGBTQ plus narrators? I imagine it was difficult to come out when Japanese Americans were seen as, quote, enemy aliens, so during the war, but I wonder if those stories were told retrospectively. Um, and, as this person who asked the question acknowledges, this is an extremely difficult topic. So, I can't think of any narrators at the top of my head, but I know this is something we're really, really looking for. Any stories of those folks who, LGBTQ narrators or perspectives, since they really are still underrepresented in our archives, but also in, stories about the incarceration in general. Okay. Um, Virginia or my other speakers, the other guest speakers, do you see any other questions that you quickly want to address before we wrap up? Okay. Oh, Virginia, did you want to jump in?
Well, I was just hoping to hear from the other speakers, but I'll jump in if nobody has anything to say. I just wanted to kind of pop in and say that we do regarding that question about the train ride. We do actually have a lot of people talking about that. So, like Jen mentioned, if you go in and you search for that, you'll probably get quite a few results. A lot of people talk about the shades being, having to pull the shades, the long ride and that sort of thing. But I do think a lot of the questions that your people are asking in terms of what types of stories there are, it's actually gotten much easier to search our archive to find the answer to those questions, and it'll come up with a variety of video clips for that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Virginia. And yeah, I mean, thank you all of you. I think because of time, we do want to wrap up. But again, please do email us if we didn't get to your question. And we just wanted to bring the speakers on screen again, because we're so, so grateful for your stories. Well, also your time. Thank you for being here. And just opening this up. So any other thoughts, anything else folks would want to share before we close out? Okay. Well, then thank you so much. And thank you everyone in the audience for being here and sharing your time with us as well. We'll be in touch and in some kind of follow-up, and otherwise, please do find, you can find our recording on our event page. But yep, thank you so much, and we look forward to being in touch.